Is that all you've got? Nancy looked down at me with disdain, and I felt my stomach churn, but I held it in. She seemed unaware of my discomfort as she whispered something into James' ear. Annoyed by my gaze, James pushed Nancy aside and confronted me. What's your problem? Don't take it out on us just because you're not talented. Seeing James puff himself up like that only made me feel worse, but I chose to remain silent. Arguing with him would only bring me down to his level.
If only we'd put James in charge from the start instead of you clinging to pointless pride.
Nancy sneered, and that's when I lost my temper. All right then, why don't you tell me what's so crucial about running a company? I'd been ignoring their issues up until now, but being directly attacked like this was more than I could take. At this point, I had to raise my voice against James and Nancy, who wouldn't hesitate to treat employees like disposable pawns if it served their purpose. Dumbfounded, James had nothing to say, so I turned to Nancy. If you have any intention of supporting James as his wife, you can at least offer that advice, can't you? Caught off guard, Nancy was at a loss for words, her eyes darting around aimlessly. My name is Emma. I am a 32-year-old single woman who runs a company. My family has been in the business since my grandfather, Robert's time, and he's now retired and enjoying his life. My dad, Richard, was supposed to take over the business, but he had other ambitions and chose not to. I have a partner named James, but like Richard, he's always following his passion instead of joining the family business. Richard became a world-renowned musician, and in his stead, I now run the company founded by Robert. We grew up in a fairly affluent household, but our lifestyle is anything but extravagant. Robert always says, "Once you raise your standard of living, it's almost impossible to lower it. You'll just keep wanting more and it will be irreversible." Having lived through this himself, it's become something of a family motto. Even though Robert has had great success running a business, and Richard is a successful musician, our family's lifestyle hasn't changed a bit. Birthdays, school admissions, graduations. We might splurge a little on special occasions, but you won't find us driving luxury cars or surrounded by designer brands all the time. The extra money usually goes back into the business or is donated to good causes. For me, living modestly has just become second nature. I don't flaunt my family's business achievements to old school friends either. To be honest, back when I was in high school, I casually told a boyfriend that my family was well off. His attitude changed overnight. He started expecting high-end gifts to his birthday, and suddenly, I was the one paying for everything on our dates. I was hesitant to talk about our financial situation after that, especially since I was getting my allowance from my mom, Jennifer. I didn't want to attract people who were just after my money. At the time, I was working for Robert's company. I never disclosed that I was Robert's grandchild and was treated the same as any other employee. I kept it that way to avoid jealousy and gossip in the office. Then one day, James introduced us to a woman named Nancy, who later became his wife. Richard was away on a world tour as a musician at that time, so it was Jennifer and Robert who welcomed her. Based on what I heard after getting back from work, Robert wasn't impressed, and neither was Jennifer. However, Richard later said it was all good if they were in love. Nancy eventually became my sister-in-law. Fast forward to a New Year's celebration, James and Nancy visited our family home. Richard also happened to be home, making it a full house of 6. Somehow, the topic shifted to my salary, and James and Nancy started criticizing me. "Why is your salary so low, Emma?"
You're the grandchild of the boss. You should have a lot more sway.
By that time, Robert, who normally would have put James in his place, had already gone to bed. Jennifer was busy preparing soup in the kitchen. Richard, who wasn't fully aware of my current situation, simply watched our exchange quietly. "I make it what I make because I'm still learning. It's as simple as that. Taking into account that I was already making a higher salary than those who'd been at the company longer, just because I'm the CEO's grandchild, I had a heated argument with the ever-complaining James. Just because I get special treatment doesn't mean it's worth anything if I can contribute to the company. Plus, having extra money doesn't make sense if you have no use for it.
Come on, there's plenty of ways to use money. Shouldn't you be more considerate of us?
I frowned at Nancy's argument, not really understanding her point. I glanced at Richard, but he was engrossed in watching TV, so I couldn't gauge his reaction. Honestly, I'm satisfied with my current salary and don't have any complaints about my working conditions, mostly because I can buy anything I want. However, it seemed like James and his wife weren't pleased with what I was saying. Despite the family tension during the New Year's celebration, I kept my work and personal life separate and tackled my job responsibilities diligently after the holiday. A few days after returning to work, I was taking a short break at home when James called. When I answered, he apologized for the previous disagreement. Sorry about the other day. Got carried away being back home after so long. Money isn't everything, you know. Nancy always says she's sorry for overstepping. I was left speechless by James' subdued apology. It was true that James and Nancy had both been drinking that night, and being back home after so long probably made them bolder than usual. I was bothered by Nancy's words, but since they seemed repentant, I decided to let it go this time. From then on, I poured myself into my work even more and enjoyed a fulfilling life. Eventually, my hard work started paying off, and there were even talks of a promotion. When I got home, Robert was waiting for me at the entrance, and I was summoned to his room. You've been working hard, it seems. It's about time I started teaching you my responsibilities. Plan on taking over the company eventually, and stick with me. Hearing these words, I felt invigorated. I had studied economics in college to prepare myself for eventually taking over the company. My efforts to not only improve my department, but the entire company were finally bearing fruit. Still, being told about taking over the company sooner than I had expected left me somewhat shaken. I had no time to dwell on it, as Robert immediately began mentoring me intensively. Engrossed in absorbing all the knowledge he was imparting, I had completely forgotten about James and Nancy. After my days of intense training with Robert, I was worn out every time I came home. But soon, Robert retired. Emma, you've done well. I trust that you can take it from here. Do your best. With that, he built an annex on the property and is now enjoying his leisurely retirement. A while after I officially took over the company, James called me again. Emma, I got something to discuss with you. Feeling a sense of unease, I listen as James starts talking apologetically. Hey, I need a favor. It's Nancy's birthday this month and... James tells me he wants to get Nancy a birthday gift. For the past few years, he's managed to scrape something together. But this year, he found an accessory that would be perfect for Nancy and he really wants to give it to her. He didn't look for other gifts, but he couldn't shake the thought of that accessory. Basically, he wants to borrow money. But if it's for Nancy's birthday gift, I can say no. It's around $300, so I happily agree. Not long after, I get a call from Nancy. I'm surprised as this is rare. I answer, and she's thanking me for the gift. James must have told her that I helped him out. I couldn't help but find it endearing that he told her, even if he didn't have to.
So here's the thing,
she says.
We're planning a trip together, but we're a little short on cash. Can you help us out? We'll pay you back quickly.
Feeling this might be a high-value return gift for what I did for James, I happily agree again. After that, the couple started asking to borrow money from me for all sorts of things. At first, it was easy to say yes. But as time went on, their attitude changed and the amount started to increase. Finally, losing trust in the couple. I ignored a new call from Nancy. Then I get incessant calls from both James and Nancy. Annoyed, I finally pick up a call from Nancy, and the first thing she does is yell at me.
Why aren't you picking up? I've been calling you over and over.
Let me guess, Nancy, you need money again? Silenced for a moment. Her voice raises again.
What's that tone? I'm spending the money so it won't go to waste in your business, you know?
That makes no sense. You're spending my money. Frustrated, she raises her voice even further.
Emma, how much are you making a year?
Suspicious, I answer. Right now, I'm only making around $30,000. I just started in my position. Hearing that, Nancy snorts and her attitude inflates.
That's what you get for being so showy and not letting James take over the business.
Letting James taking over the business? What is she talking about? James told everyone he didn't want to take over Robert's company, opting to move out and chase his dream of becoming a musician. So why are we even talking about James? Before I could muster up a response, she said,
Look, I need $5,000 by the day after tomorrow. Make sure it's ready.
She hung up without waiting for a reply, and the room fell silent. I used to give her up to $2,000, but now she's demanding $5,000 all of a sudden. What's more, her whole attitude and comments like, be more considerate, were irking me, so I decided to go to Robert, who was in a separate building. I told Robert everything, and he let out a deep sigh. I knew I was going to get scolded for lending money too easily. Richard has musical talent. That's why I let him do his thing. James, however, has nothing. Even if he joined the company, he wouldn't amount to anything. I always knew it. For a moment, I wondered what they were talking about, then realized it was about Richard and James. Sure enough, the choices Richard and James made are similar. Neither of them took over Robert's company, and both of them are interested in something music-related. But the crucial difference was their willingness to work hard. Richard thought for himself, brainstormed, and searched for the best ways to achieve what he wanted. James, on the other hand, simply copied Richard and chose to pursue music because he didn't want to work. I knew Richard had succeeded while James was still struggling. I also never liked James' wife, just so you know, Robert said, sighing and holding his head in his hands. Emma, listen carefully. You need to do exactly as I say from now on. Confused, I nodded and clenched my teeth, imagining what would unfold next. First, I contacted Richard. Luckily, he was still in the States, and he promised to align his plans after I explained the situation. Next, I spoke to Jennifer. She listened quietly, her eyes downcast but nodded firmly when I finished talking. I then prepared for the next day, waking up with mixed feelings. The following morning, I went to the bank to withdraw the money before heading to the office. I settled into my still unfamiliar office chair, took a deep breath, and reached out to James. After a while, I received a message that James and his wife were causing a commotion in the reception area, so I invited them into my office. Emma, what do you mean you won't support us anymore? James immediately yelled at me. I gestured for them to sit, but both James and his wife continued yelling without taking a seat. I let out a sigh and moved to the reception area's couch, placing an envelope quietly on the table. Immediately, Nancy sat on the couch across from me and checked the contents of the envelope.
Hey, this isn't enough. What's the deal?
Hearing this, James sat next to Nancy, and they both examined what was inside the envelope. Wait, why is this only half? We agreed on $5,000, didn't we? That's right. The envelope only contained half of the money they had demanded. As for the amount, Robert had told me to decide on the final severance package myself. This is the best I can do. I can't afford to give any more. Upon hearing this, James and Nancy scoffed at me.
That's it? This is not doing so well?
Ignoring my annoyed expression, Nancy whispered something in James' ear. Not liking the look in my eyes, James shoved Nancy aside and confronted me. "Don't take your lack of business skills out on us." Rather than respond, I chose to remain silent, not wanting to stoop to their level.
If you had left the company to James from the start, none of this would have happened.
Nancy sneered. At that point, my patience snapped. There's no way James, who shrinks employment to pursue music and leans on parental privilege, could manage a business. Add to that their parasitic lifestyle, living off me, and now trying to depend on Robert's company.
If you're going to say that, I hope you understand what's important in running a business.
Normally, I'd let things slide to avoid issues, but even I have my limits. Outraged by James and Nancy's self-serving attitude, treating employees like pawns, I finally raised my voice. I looked at James, whose mouth was agape, then turned to Nancy.
If you plan on supporting James as his wife, I hope you can at least give some sound advice.
Nancy, who never expected the conversation to turn on her, stuttered and said nothing.
Neither wanting to join Robert's company nor working hard like Richard, I can entrust my business to people like you? The money I can give is all I have. Why don't you come over tonight?
I said that and kicked James and Nancy out of the office, then returned to my own. I apologized to the employee who came to check on the commotion and refocused on the day's work. That night, James and his wife happily showed up. But when they found were Robert wearing an almost devilish expression, Richard completely poker-faced, and Jennifer, who had her back turned to everyone.
"Sit wherever you like, okay?"
I said, taking a seat at the kitchen table and gesturing for James and his wife to do the same. Instead, they chose to sit formally on their knees in front of the living room sofa where Robert and Richard were sitting. Clearly, they were putting on airs, but didn't dare to act disrespectful in front of Robert. Next to speak was Richard.
"James, Nancy, what are your plans for the future?"
Caught off guard by Richard's words, James and his wife exchanged bewildered glances and said nothing.
"James!"
When Richard called out his name, James visibly flinched and cautiously looked up.
"When will you be making your debut, James?"
It looked like James couldn't comprehend the question, staring blankly at Richard. Richard said no more, just holding James in his gaze.
"Nancy?"
Growing impatient, Robert spoke up, addressing Nancy, whose face paled under the weight of his words.
"Do you really think the company will do better under James than Emma? And if so, why?"
Nancy had no answer and looked down in silence. For a while, no one said anything. The only sound was Jennifer cooking in the background. Eventually, an array of dishes lined in the kitchen counter, and Jennifer took a satisfied breath.
"All right, James, Nancy, come on over. Let's eat before it gets cold."
At Jennifer's words, everyone gathered in the kitchen and quietly took their seats. The tense meal commenced, and even Jennifer's usually delicious cooking seemed to lack flavor. After we finished eating and Richard and I were clearing the table, Jennifer served coffee. She placed cups in front of Robert and James and his wife, then took a seat next to Robert.
"How was your last supper, James?"
"What? Jennifer, what are you talking about?"
"Starting today, you are no longer our son, James. And Nancy, sorry, but please stay away from this house and from Emma. That includes her company as well."
Ignoring my startled glance back, Richard starts doing the dishes. Robert sits in silence, sipping his coffee. Sure, I had asked Jennifer to scold James, but I never expected this. Unfazed by our astonishment, Jennifer continues.
"We've been lenient with James because of Richard, but that was a mistake. I thought it was just a phase. James asking for increasingly expensive gifts each year, but it turns out I was wrong."
Jennifer locks eyes with James,
who lowers his gaze and shrugs his shoulders.
And Nancy, you love brand name items, don't you? We don't live that sort of lifestyle here. You better work hard to earn them yourself.
Upon closer inspection, Nancy, clad in luxury brands that even I've heard of, awkwardly shrinks into herself.
So that's how it is? Use the money you got from Emma wisely and just leave?
With that, Jennifer exits the kitchen. Richard finishes cleaning up and heads upstairs. Robert drains his cup of tea, washes it in the sink, and goes back to the annex. I observe James and his wife for a moment, sigh, and decide to retreat to my room. Almost immediately, I hear arguing voices from the kitchen, but I chose to ignore them. I hear the front door close, so I plan for tomorrow's work, and finally the house grows quiet. It seems James and his wife have left. In the end, they ended up divorcing. James, who had been chasing a dream of becoming a musician, had no stable income. Nancy, for her part, had been financially reliant on her own parents. Their situation reached a breaking point. Both were disowned, and at first, Nancy juggled part-time jobs while living with James. But their unsustainable lifestyle caught up to them, and their marriage crumbled under the weight of debt. As for James, he seems to have come to terms with his limitations and has given up his musician dreams. He is now working as a day laborer to repay his debts. James and I were raised in the same environment. Our family was well off, but frugal. James had been unhappy for a long time about our lifestyle, fueled by the illusion that, like Richard, he could achieve wealth without traditional employment. So he chose to live frivolously, being taken care of after marriage. Unfortunately for Nancy, she had married James hoping for a slice of the pie, and this is how it ended. I don't understand how someone could think that way. But it seems that James lacks the qualities of a good manager and doesn't have Richard's talents. His choice to avoid hard work led to his disownment and divorce. As for me, I'd been diligently doing what I can, improving performance even before Robert's retirement. The employees also seem happy, so for now, I'm relieved. I haven't seen James or Nancy since, but that doesn't matter. I am too absorbed in my work to care. I plan to continue pushing forward, growing the company.